Romans chapter 1. This, of course, is Paul's epistle. It's a letter to the Romans. He's writing it now to two categories, and I'm going to show you where they are. The first one is Christians, verse 5. Romans 1:5. By whom we, when he includes himself, he's talking to Christians. He wouldn't say we if he was talking to a lost person. By whom we have received grace and apostleship for obedience to faith among all nations for his name, among whom are ye also the called of Jesus Christ. So he's saying the ones I'm talking to are called of Jesus Christ, so they're saved. Verse 7, to all that be in Rome, beloved of God, called to be saints. Clearly he's talking to Christians. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, so that's one category. But he speaks also to lost people, not just saved people. This is going to be a great book because he's going to explain salvation in an area that had little influence from the gospel. Obviously, they had had some because he expected his letter to be going to Christians. But he also talks to lost, verse 20. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imagination, and their foolish heart was darkened. Okay, that ain't to Christians. That's obviously to lost people. So he's aiming his book here, his letter, to both saved and lost. The theme of the book here is about salvation. But it's more than just salvation. It's justification by faith. No works. This is a change. It's a drastic difference. Included in this is, of course, I'm going to give you a bunch of words. And as we go through the book, we'll define those words. But here's the words. Redemption, sanctification, regeneration, adoption, remission, reconciliation, propitiation, circumcision, imputation, and predestination. That's a mouthful. All of those are parts of what transpired when you got saved. And they all have powerful meanings, and that's why he's writing this book, to inform them of how great salvation they got. Amen. The book is related to Galatians, and that Galatians refers to salvation a lot. It's a heavy theme on how great salvation we have. Both of them have a lot of information on what is necessary for salvation for our dispensation. Those are important books. Now we'll get into the book. Romans 1, verse 1. It says, Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated unto the gospel of God. Paul says he's separated unto the gospel of God. Hold your place there. We'll come back to Romans, but go to 2 Corinthians 6. If you're separated unto, the unto will do you no good unless you're separated from. It requires both, from and to. When you write people don't know how to do this anymore. When you write a letter, with a pen, and you put it in that mailbox out front, flip the little flag up. I told Toby, I am old school. We got the new landlord here, so instead of me being able to leave a check on the pulpit and tell him just to go get it, I've got to mail it. So I said, I did something the young people know nothing of. I wrote a check, and I addressed an envelope and put a stamp on it. That's foreign. But on that envelope, you've got a to and you've got a from. Now, you're not going to go anywhere if you don't know where you're going to and from. Now, Paul says I'm separated from because I'm separated to. I'm going somewhere. In 2 Corinthians 6, look at verse 17. He says, wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. Get away from so you can go to. He said in Romans he was separated unto the gospel of God. Look at it in Proverbs 18, great principle, Proverbs 18:1. Want to get anything done, memorize this verse. This is motivation for man. Pure humanism here. Now, I don't mean it as it's from man, but I mean you could be unsaved and follow this principle, and it would help you. He says, verse 1, through desire, a man having separated himself, that's from, and here's the 2, seeketh and intermeddleth with all wisdom. So you want to learn something, you separate from the potato chip bag, and you separate yourself to, dedicate yourself to whatever it is you want to learn. Okay, it requires both. God called Paul, of course, on the road to Damascus to be an apostle. His calling is very unique. Nobody else gets this. When you got saved, you weren't walking down the road and all of a sudden a bright light shone and God spoke out of heaven. And okay, he's got something very different. This is unusual. Look at it in Galatians 1. Galatians 1, verse 16. Galatians 1:16, to reveal his Son in me, that I might preach him among the heathen. Now that ought to make you feel good. Among the heathen. That's you before you got saved.
Amen.
A heathen. Immediately I conferred not with flesh and blood, neither went I up to Jerusalem to them which were apostles before me, but I went into Arabia and returned again unto Damascus. So he's gotten a special call and a special training. It was direct from God. Nobody else got that. Paul is a unique character. Look at Romans 11. Romans 11, verse 13. Now he's going to talk about these heathen. Romans 11, verse 13. For I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am the apostle of the Gentiles. I magnify mine office. He says, God gave me this position, and I'm going to make a lot of it because it's not one I made up. God gave it to me. So he says he's the apostle to the Gentiles. That's an official title. And we'll find some more of them. His job was go to the Gentiles with the message that the Jews had rejected, and now God makes available to the Gentiles and the rest of the world. Look at Acts chapter 28. Acts 28:28. Acts 28:28. Be it known therefore unto you that the salvation of God is sent unto the Gentiles, and that they will hear it. He tried and tried to get his message out to the Jews, and they kept rejecting him. And he said, God's given me a job to do, and I got to get this gospel out. And he's told me that the Gentiles can get in. And I think he just made it clear to me, I'm done with you Jews. I'll go to the Gentiles. I know they're going to receive it. And he did. And that's where we get in. Look at Galatians 2. Galatians 2, verse 8. Now, pay attention because we're going to hit a contradiction. Galatians 2, verse 8. For he that wrought effectually in Peter, the apostle of the circumcision, Jews, the same was mighty in me toward the Gentiles. Yes, he's the apostle to the Gentiles. However, does that mean, if you don't put all the verses together, right, you don't see it, but it appears Paul's saying, I'm the one that opens the door to the Gentiles, and Peter's saying, I'm the one that brings the gospel to the Jews. But let's find out. Matthew 16. Matthew 16, verse 18. Matthew 16:18. And I say also unto thee, he's talking to Peter, that thou art Peter. Yep, that's his name. And upon this rock, speaking of himself, I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto thee, Peter, the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Okay, so Peter's got a job. He's got keys, plural. Well, there's two groups we clearly see in the Bible: circumcision and uncircumcision. The Jews and the Gentiles, meaning anybody that's not a Jew is a Gentile. So he's got two keys that we know of for sure here, and he's supposed to use these keys, and that's what he does. It's Peter who first brings the gospel to the Gentiles, not Paul. Paul comes along later, and we'll see the transition as it takes place. Look at Acts 15. Acts 15, verse 7. Peter opens the door, unlocks it, and then steps away. Paul stands at the door and starts hollering at people, "Get in here!" Acts 15, verse 7. And when there had been much disputing, Peter rose up and said unto them, Men and brethren, you know how a good while ago God made choice among us that the Gentiles by my mouth should hear the word of the gospel and believe. So he's saying clearly, I got the Gentiles. I was responsible for getting this thing started with Gentiles, and he was. He was the one given the key for that, and he opened it. He unlocked the door, and then the ministry of the Gentiles was given to Paul, even though Peter opened the door. Look at Romans 11:13. We've covered it, but Romans 11:13. Paul speaking now, for I speak unto you Gentiles inasmuch as I am the apostle of the Gentiles. Peter opened the door, but he's not the apostle to the Gentiles. He was just the door opener. He was the unlocker. Now I'm going to show you some similarities between the two, Peter and Paul. Peter was given a job to try to convince the Jews what God's new plan was after the nation had rejected his son. So, look at it in Acts 3. Acts 3, verse 1. It says, Now Peter and John went up together into the temple at the hour of prayer, being the 9th hour, and a certain man, lame from his mother's womb, was carried, whom they had laid at the gate of the temple, which is called Beautiful. The temple's called Beautiful, not the lame man. To ask alms of them that entered into the temple, who seeing Peter and John about to go into the temple, asked an alms. And Peter, fastening his eyes upon him with John, said, Look on us. And he gave heed unto them, expecting to receive something of them. And Peter said, Silver and gold have I none. Sounds like me. But such as I have, give I thee. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk. And so he does. He gets up and he walks. He heals a man. This is something miraculous. And that was Peter. We would expect that out of Peter because he's going to the to the Jews. And that's the way God dealt with the nation of Israel, was through miraculous events. But it's also the way that God starts the ministry to the Gentiles, so that the Jews around can say, it's not just a nation thing, it's a whosoever will thing. Look at it in Acts 14. Acts 14, verse 8. Real similar circumstances here. Now, it's Paul who's going to heal a crippled man. Well, it's actually God that's going to do it through Paul. And there sat a certain man at Lystra, impotent from his feet, being a cripple from his mother's womb, who never had walked. Same thing. Paul goes in there. Now it's Paul that's going to heal him. See, the two are linking. If you'll open your eyes and watch it, you can see God transition. Peter opens the door, and now Paul stands at the door and mimics almost all the same things Peter had done. Another thing he does is many miracles in Acts 5:15. You see Peter do one. Acts 19:11, Paul duplicates it. The dead are raised in Acts 9:36. That's Peter. In Acts 20, verse 9, Paul does it. Flipping, flopping back and forth all the way through your book of Acts. Divine judgment, look at Acts 5:3. Now, I hope nobody gets on such a pastoral kick they try this. Acts 5:3. But Peter said, Ananias, why hath Satan filled thine heart to lie to the Holy Ghost, and to keep back part of the price of the land? Whilst it remained, was it not thine own? And after it was sold, was it not in thine own power? Why hast thou conceived this thing in thine heart? Thou hast not lied unto men, but unto God. And Ananias, hearing these words, fell down and gave up the ghost, and great fear came on all those that heard these things. He says the same thing to his wife. He says, how is it that you agreed to lie together? He says, the men are standing at the door. They just wound up your husband, and they'll take you out next. He's declaring a divine judgment on a person. That's you better not try that one. God might turn it around and show you ain't so important. But he had these special events he was doing. That was to convince a nation that was formed on the basis of signs and miracles, Israel. And at the beginning of the church age, he shows up doing signs and miracles in order to convince the Jews they better get in line with the new plan God's using. Same thing happens with Paul in Acts 13:8. Elymas, the sorcerer, same thing. He declares judgment against him. It's a divine judgment. Then their healings are compared back and forth. You'll find those in chapter 9, Peter, chapter 28, Paul. They both saw visions, Acts 10 and Acts 16. I'm not going to run through all of those. But the fact of the matter is this. Paul, who is our apostle, starts out almost the same way you see God deal with the nation. And there's a reason for it. Because God dealt with a nation, the Jews require a sign. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's the way God made them. Remember when Moses came in to convince them he was going to lead them out and God was going to use him to do it with? He says, do all of these signs to convince them. Put your hand in your coat and bring it out, and make leprosy appear and disappear, and throw down the stick and make it a snake, and I'll make it back into a stick again. All of those signs, God said, I'm going to use these signs to convince these certain people that I'm God. Now that's not changed. For a Gentile, we seek something totally different. A Gentile, I don't think we're as gullible. I know that sounds mean, but we're not as gullible. You know what happens when you see a sign? Usually you say, what's the trick behind that? That's not the way God created the Jews. He created them to be in awe of signs and lying wonders. That's why the Antichrist shows up doing signs and lying wonders, so that they can fall in step with him. Jesus Christ shows up, he does signs and wonders to a point. And then he says, you've already been convinced. Now you're just wanting a show. And for both of us, Jews and Gentiles, we have to go against our nature. For a Christian, we want to know the ins and outs of everything. Look at Hebrews 11. We want to know the ins and outs and, delve in and get all the whys of everything. We don't get signs and wonders. We get education. However, there comes a point God says, I'm going to test you. And there's some things you will not have an answer for. Will you believe me still? Hebrews 11, look at, of course, verse 1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, for by it the elders obtained a good report. So he says faith is something you can't prove. If you can prove it, it's not faith. If you can see it, it is not faith. Look at verse 6. But without faith it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, not see it, believe it. And that he is the rewarder of them that diligently seek him. You come to him on the front end saying, I wholeheartedly agree and believe, without any proof for it. Now that goes against our nature as Gentiles. Because God's made us to want to delve in and find the whys and the hows. And he's made the Jews to do the opposite. The Jews are going to say, I don't have to understand it, just show me something fun. And that's the way he's made them. People are made different. But just because you're made different, don't forget the fact that God will always test you. And if you start relying on what is natural to you, wanting to know all the details, God's always going to test you with something else. So a lot of times in the Bible, he's going to say something, and you're going to say, well, that didn't make any sense to me. And he's going to say, well, you believe it anyway? And you'll have to believe it. Let me show you one other thing, and then we'll be done. Acts, we saw it. Acts, I think it's 5. Yes, Acts 5. Acts 5:3. This is the story of Ananias and Sapphira. And they had cooked up this plan. At the time, the church had all things in common. That is, they all got together, and it's a great system, if it works, where that everybody got together and they talked about what needs do you have, what needs do you have. Okay, everybody, whatever money you made this week, let's put it in the pot. We'll divvy it up amongst everybody. And that worked for a little while. And then you find where they decided it wasn't working too well. And they said, we're not going to... You'll find in Acts where they said they were worried that their women, their widows, were not being cared for in the daily ministration. That means the daily giving out of what was needed for the ministry. So for the old women in this area were saying, well, they got money, but we didn't get no money. Like that. Well, that's what's going to happen. Here's what's going on. They had everything in common, and it was time to bring in all the money, bring in the dough. And so Ananias and Sapphira have cooked up a plan. We're going to go. We sold our house, and we made good money on it. And, we need a rainy day fund, so we'll give them a good amount, and they'll be impressed, but they don't have to know what we actually sold it for. Peter says you were exactly right. When it was yours to do with as you wanted. It's not a law that they had to have everything in common. That was just something they were doing of their own free will. Now, if a preacher tells you, you must give 10%, a tithe, take him to this passage, and I'm going to show you a verse. Let's see. Verse 4. Whiles it remained, was it not thine own? And after it was sold, was it not in thine own power? If you're supposed to give 10%, after you sold it, it's not in his power. 90%'s in his power, 10% is owed. But that's not what Peter said. Peter said it was 100% in your power. The problem is not the percentage you gave or didn't give. The problem is the lie. So he didn't force a 10% there. So why would they force it in the New Testament?